Welcome to the Strategy Mob Podcast. Tune in for everything you need to know to stay in the know regarding the automotive industry. Here's your host, Jason Harris.
Hey, what's going on, Podcast Nation? It is Jason Harris here, and thank you for joining me on another episode of Strategy with Jason. Today, I have an amazing guest. We're going to talk about something that just unfortunately doesn't get talked about enough. And usually when we do have to talk about it, it is way too late for us to even have a discussion about it. We're going to talk about dispute. We're talking about resolution and resolving those disputes. We're going to talk about ad compliancy and just everything a dealer needs to do to ensure that they are protecting their own personal liability. I have the oh-so-famous Mr. Tom Kline with me today. Hey, Tom, what's going on?
Hey, Jason, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad we were able to connect, and I'm so glad to actually be able to do this topic because, honestly, I don't think that there's enough content out there about this. And, you know, myself, I was a young dealer principal, very fresh and new to the game, you know, about 5 or 6 years ago, and there was just a lot of things that I had to learn by fire. It was very much so a baptism by fire, and, you know, if there was just enough content, I think I would have been better prepared. And I still think there's even dealer principals that have been in the business for a long time. They've never had to deal with these things. So I'm super excited to have this conversation. But before we get into the depth of our conversation today, I thought we'd start off with an origin story because I'm always so curious to find out how people stumbled their way into our industry. So Tom, how did you get started in this crazy little world we call the automotive industry?
Thanks, Jason. So my grandfather was in the business, and he started his dealership in 1925. In fact,
cow, wow.
I have something here to show you. I don't know if you remember what this is.
Oh my gosh, look at that. Yes, there would have been in every single desk.
Yes, there was an ashtray on every desk. He started in 1925. You can see he was a Chevrolet dealer. Courtesy and fairness was his motto. 13th and Monticello is here in Norfolk, Virginia, which is where I am.
That is so cool. You know what I actually love about that is the logo, right? Like in today's standards, your name could never be larger than the manufacturer's name. But back then, you could. It was kind of, you can do whatever you want. Sorry. Anyways, go ahead.
Okay. So he started in 1925. My father and my uncle joined him after they were out of college. And in 1964, what was then Princess Anne County, an option came up for a dealership there. The population at that time was 4,000 to 5,000 in Princess Anne County. And my father had conversation with his brother and his father and said, "Are you interested in this?" And they said, "No, we're not interested. Nothing will ever happen down there in that county." That county then became Virginia Beach, which is now the largest city in Virginia. And that's where he started RK Chevrolet, which was back in 1964.
Wow.
And we sold the dealership recently. And I've been in the business for 30 years.
You know, that's so cool. You know, I find there's so many similar stories out there, right? I find people get into the business like one of three ways, right? Either they were born into the business, like you were. I mean, very generational. Like 1925, man, I can't
100
imagine.
years.
Like I can't. To put that in context, 100 years.
To put that in context, how many years is old the United? How many years is the United States old? 260, 70, whatever it is.
So yeah, yep.
And my family has been in the car business for 100 out of those years. So what's that? 30% of the of the age of the United States. My family's been selling cars, so a long time.
That is so cool. I can't imagine just the rich history and stories. You know what I mean? Like I think there probably has to be a book written, but we could probably say that for another podcast. But like I said, I find people either are born into it, they stumble their way into it. My way, I was conned into it. But that is just so cool that, you know, for the last 100 years, your entire family has dedicated their professional career to the automotive space. So I'm so glad to have you on here. I'm so glad to get into this conversation, and I got, you know, kind of 5 or 6 different kind of areas that I want to focus on. But, you know, I think the one I want to kind of focus on right now being, let's go reputation management.
Okay.
Because I hate to say it, But I think there's a lot of snake oil right now going around as far as what reputation management means. It's almost kind of become like one of those words like conversion, like it has 62 different variations or meanings to it. And I don't think necessarily people understand, how it actually impacts the business. So, for you, what does reputation management mean to you?
Sure. It's a great question, and it's a great area that I think dealers have to focus on. There are a lot of vendors who will charge you $99 to handle your reputation.
Exactly.
And that's hard to do. The important thing that dealers have to do is read their reviews. And I recommend that dealers look at over 36 websites. They don't all have to be looked at on a daily basis, but certainly on a monthly basis. There are 36 different websites that dealers should pay attention to. Some of the big ones, of course, everybody knows: Dealer Rater, My 3 Cents, Google, Facebook, those kinds of things. But a dealer can learn a lot by reading the comments that customers put up there and use that as a tool in order how to manage his business. He's getting complaints about the service department, really the service department. If he's getting complaints that the sales department takes too long to finish the deal, right? Everybody hears that. Then that's another thing. If the dealer is hearing things that are going on, or if these comments say things that are going on that really raise the dealer's eyebrows, when people say, I was defrauded and I was mistreated and you guys are a bunch of crooks, that's when some finesse is required and involved. And having a process and a procedure, or hiring somebody else to do it for you, and how to respond, not only how to post and to say, but also follow up with the customer. After you post something, you should pick up the phone, call the customer. 9 times out of 10, unless the customer is going by, Gladiator 124 or something as their name, it has their name right on there. And the dealer can go back through the records, get the phone number, pick up the phone, or have one of his managers who has the authority to resolve problems pick up the phone and try to get the customer straightened out or get them in. I always recommend not trying to do it over the telephone, but have them come into the store, sit down, and try to get the problems resolved.
I'm so with you on that. What I find is there's some training that's required behind this. And, I've had the opportunity to visit thousands of dealerships and sit down with many, many of them to deep dive into their operations. And I'm with you. I think looking at those reviews, well, even for me, when I was a dealer principal, it was the pulse of my business. It was where operations and clients met, and where the clients were in a place or an environment where they felt comfortable, they could say what they wanted to say. And it was good or bad, it didn't really matter, but I had to have a mindset that my willingness to actually just want to acknowledge it, right? Like, I understand, like, this is someone's perception. It's not necessarily the truth, it's their perception. But their perception is their own truth. And I had to be in that mindset to really kind of just, I guess, consume and chew on that information. But look, I won't lie, I was a little hot-headed in some of the way I would have responded to these. And I thought about this, later on, is that, there's not a whole lot of training out there on how to, resolve dispute like that. And, so it's like, yes, it's great to have a manager, make that phone call, but if that manager's not trained to properly resolve that, it's actually can just make everything even worse. So that's what I want to, that's my question for you. It's like advice for dealers out that are watching and listening right now. And, they're in that boat where they want to make that phone call. They want to connect with that customer. They want to resolve this, but they don't necessarily have been ever trained on how to, sometimes hostage negotiations, it feels like, so maybe a few tips on how you have that conversation.
Sure. It's a great question. I think the first most important thing is to eliminate a culture of, yeah, but we were right.
Yeah.
We didn't do anything. We didn't do anything wrong. You have to eliminate that culture, because it really doesn't matter. If you don't fix the problem, it's going to get worse. Now, some dealers say, hey, I'd rather just leave it alone, not spend the money. And if it blows up, and I'll deal with it. Well, that's not what I would advocate. That's not the right way to do things, in my opinion. The first, I guess, most important thing is to not be defensive.
Yes, exactly.
It's probably the first and most important rule. Overall, don't be defensive. You call the customer, you say, I understand you have a problem. I want to be helpful to you. I want to fix the problem, and I don't want you to be upset with us. When can you come in and see me? And you mentioned hostage negotiations. You can't fix a problem on the phone.
That's true.
You just, unless you're Chris Voss. If you're Chris Voss, you can fix it. He's the hostage negotiator who teaches negotiations now. But unless you're him, you can't fix a problem on the phone if you're a car dealer. You've got to have the customer come in. And that part of that is having them invest the time and the energy in order to fix the problem. Because if they can just hang up the phone and say, screw them, and I'm not doing that, or whatever it may be, they're not invested in the process. You'll never fix it. So having them come in is the second, I would say, most important step. And then at the first meeting, setting expectations that, hey, I'm not going to resolve everything today. I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to take notes. It's really important. The third most important thing is, I would say, the customer has to feel like you listened to their problem. Yes. And really understood it. Because unless you listen to the whole story, and you've got to let them tell you the whole story, unless you listen to all that, you really don't understand what they went through, and you don't understand where the potential problems are within your operation, just like you said.
I actually think that's probably one of the biggest ones. It's just really shut up and listen. I think too often, and look, I'm totally guilty of this. Like I gotta admit that I am. My EQ is not overly high sometimes, and I'm very, I think very logically. I process things kind of in order, and when someone's sharing a story with me, I have to remind myself to shut up, because I will literally try to correct every single little element of the story.
Right.
But it's key though. If you want to get to that place, and we were talking about that place where you can actually connect. All right, and then get to a place where you can actually resolve something. I think that's one of the biggest ones, is that you actually have to be willing to hear them out, regardless of your thoughts and opinions of what their perception is.
And I think that is very important, because what I would advocate that you do in the first meeting is you sit down, you say, I want to hear your whole story. You hold up a blank pad of paper and you say, I'm going to take notes. I may interrupt you as you tell the story, because I want to make sure I understand all that what you're telling me. And then at the end, after you go through your whole story, I'm going to read back what I wrote down, and then you tell me if I left anything out.
That's a great process. I like that a lot.
And the customer feels heard. And so part of the process is you have to extract the venom. You have to get all the upset out and get it on the table. As the expression goes, sunshine's the best disinfectant, right? So that's what the first meeting's about.
Now, like I said, I mean, taking the time to do this, and it is time. This is time, right? Look, the two things that we value most in our industry is money and time. And,
right.
I find that the excuse that I get from a fair amount of clients is that we don't have time for that. And I have to kind of push back on this, because this is one of those time investment parts of our business that doesn't have a 30-day cycle behind it.
Right.
And you know how much we love our 30-day cycles. Right?
Yes, yes, we do.
From the beginning to the end, the 1st to the 30th or 31st or whatever. This is not one of those. This is that marathon. This is the long form run that we have to do to continue our better operations. And, it's one thing to think that your process is the right process. It's one thing to think that you have the right team, but it's your client that's ultimately going to define if you have the right process, if you have the right team, and you have to have a willingness to listen to that. And I think that's so incredibly important. I think those are some great, kind of starting points or how you kind of start off that conversation with a client, I want to kind of switch into kind of another topic that we were talking about earlier off camera, and because I think it's a big one, and at least it's a big one for me because I felt this as a DP. It's kind of personal liability around the dealer principal. Look, there's a lot of family-owned and operated businesses out there, and I don't necessarily think, I know for a fact a lot of dealerships don't necessarily know what the business is liable or how they can even be held liable for certain situations or issues. So I want to kind of your thoughts or kind of your strategies behind, protecting the personal liability of a dealer principal.
Sure. I think it's really two different areas, and the personal liability flows from certain laws. For example, in the United States, we've got obviously different laws than you do in Canada. For example, the IRS has a rule called the form that the dealer has to fill out is Form 8300, and it's the cash reporting form. And that cash reporting form has to be filled out properly, and it has to be filled out regularly, and you have to have a process for it. And willful noncompliance can land up with a fine of up to, we always love the words up to in our business,
yes, we
up to $5.5 million and up to 5 years of jail time for willful noncompliance. It's very serious, and it's taken very seriously, and the IRS is not kidding. So having the policies and procedures in place and training your employees on what to do is of critical importance. So I would say that's one example. Another example is when I go into to do an enterprise risk analysis of a dealership, and I kind of look at their operations from top to bottom. One of the first things I do is look at all their insurance policies. And when I walk around dealerships, one of the things I notice most times is that they have inadequate protection on their oil drums. That's the new and the used oil.
Mm-hmm.
And I was at a dealership not too long ago, and I said, well, you don't have any, as an example, you don't have any bollards, these big metal bollards around, so that if one of the vehicles that the mechanics were working on lost their brakes and went careening into these oil drums and they broke, that starts leaking into the groundwater. A dealer's personally liable for that in the United States. So having an insurance policy and product that would back them up is very important. It protects their personal net worth. These are the kinds of things that we go in and look at from the top to the bottom and make sure that the dealer principal is covered.
It's all about being proactive. And, I have to admit it, in our industry, we are we're not the most known for being the most proactive, industry. Not to say that there's a lot of dealerships out there that are very good at this. But, I think for sure, look, we sell metal and we service and fix metal. And that is about what we think our job responsibilities are, but it goes a lot farther than that. And, I think there's, I know what you do and what your company does. It just provides a lot of education around that. And there's just so many little aspects of there. It is, if a dealership hasn't at least had a conversation, if from listening to us talk right now, you got to at least have the conversation around, are we liable? Do we need to bring somebody in to kind of just double check here and make sure that, we actually have, what we need covered, and this kind of, but, sorry, do you hear my kid screaming in the background? No? Okay.
No.
Virtual schooling right now. We're in a lockdown. I'm just going to wait a second.
Okay.
Wait a second. Look, some of these liability issues can go as far as even becoming, kind of a criminal conduct issue. And we just had an issue recently up here where a dealership was shut down because of a very similar situation, what you were talking about earlier with the IRS and the cash reporting. We have a different agency that monitors that, but it was so negligent that it actually became a criminal situation. So I'm curious, you probably know way more about this than I do. So I'd love to, how does it go from just being a liability thing to being just a negligent, criminal situation?
So the U.S. government has guidelines that criminal conduct is, they're sentencing guidelines actually. And one of the sentencing guidelines says, does your business have a compliance management system? Does your business embrace trying to ensure that customers, specifically consumers, customers, are not taken advantage of? Do you have a self-policing mechanism? Or is there an outside third party that comes in and will ensure that your transactions are clean and that you're not payment packing and product stuffing and all the things that dealers are not supposed to do? And most of the dealers do it right, but there are some who don't, and that becomes a problem. So the sentencing guidelines say that the judges are supposed to be more lenient with those business owners who have compliance policies and procedures in place. It's scary stuff, Jason.
No, it is, and it's something that we have to take very serious. And I love the idea. Again, it's just about being proactive, right? It's just having those mechanisms in place to ensure that we're protecting ourselves. And and this is not just going into the way we transact. It's the way that we even protect our paperwork. Like a dealership right now that just recently got a monstrous fine, all right, for not properly storing documentation over X amount of years. There was a buy-sell that kind of happened, and I just don't think the new dealer principal wasn't necessarily aware of what some of those regulations were. And boy, it was a six-figure hit. It was a six-figure fine for not properly securely documenting transactions and customer data and information, specifically around financing. I mean, look, we have customer social security numbers. We had all this data that just wasn't done properly, and some of it was actually just accidentally thrown out.
Right. Well, I mean, the case of Bronx Honda is a good one that's recent. And Bronx Honda was doing all kinds of, from what I read, I wasn't there, I don't know personally, but from what I read, they were not transacting business in a proper way. And now, because of their lack of advertising procedures, I believe they signed a consent order, if my memory serves correctly, for 20 years that the Federal Trade Commission has to approve their advertising for the next 20 years.
No, look, we have the exact same thing. I have a dealership that just became a client of ours that right now, because we handle all their marketing efforts, that, for the next 5 years, I think it is for us for the next 5 years, I can't run a single ad on any single type of medium out there without having OMVIC is our governing body here that oversees kind of ad compliancy, and I can't do anything until they've actually approved it. And talk about just a giant nightmare with, especially in the automotive industry, because our messaging is changing so fast. Sometimes it takes me 2 weeks just to get a response back from the compliancy. But so that, again, this is all coming out back to being proactive, right? Right. If we want to stay away from dispute, if we want to stay away from liability issues, then it's all about proactive compliancy. So I think there's a couple different categories of proactive compliancy that we can talk about. Let's jam about ad compliancy, and then we'll kind of take it from there.
Sure. Dealers, whether that's through their marketing agency or through their lawyer or through a third party like us, someone should check your ads to make sure that they're not deceptive. They're often very deceptive. My fiance and I were looking at a luxury SUV, and this particular article was just recently posted on the internet. And the name of the article is The Lollipop One, because when you go in and the ad says that you can get it, in this case it was $687 or $689 a month, And I identified myself as a compliance consultant in the automotive industry. And is this really what you can buy it for? And you get jerked around, you know that they need help. This dealership needs some help. Because I couldn't buy it for the 689. It was like 1,084 of what I could buy the vehicle for. And I won't mention the dealership's name or the brand. That's why we'll just call it the Lollipop one. And it was quite something. And that's what it feels like. That's what a customer feels like when you bait and switch them. When you say, you know, you can have this lovely vehicle for $325 a month. And then when you come in, you know, the vehicle's not there, it just sold, or the last one just walked out the door, and you can't get any for 12 weeks, or there's a proper way to do it. And one place for sure that dealerships get jammed up is the manufacturer's fee that gets forced into their website. Yes. The manufacturers don't care, and
because they're not compliant. Like their offers.
Number two, the dealers don't check the manufacturer's ads to see if they're compliant or not. And again, the fees and the things that can happen. I know of one dealership as an example. So in the United States, if your dealership's closed more than X number of days, a day or two or three, whatever it is, manufacturer has the right to take your franchise away. And this particular dealership pissed off a customer.
Of course.
Customer went to a politician. Politician went to whatever the name of that organization is in that state. I guess it's a motor vehicle dealer board of some kind. And the motor vehicle dealer board decided that as a result of jerking this guy around, they should be closed for 7 days.
Yes.
So all of a sudden, you've got tens of millions of dollars on the line to upset one customer.
Well, and again, it's I find right now, because, like, you know, here in Ontario or Greater Toronto area where I'm in right now, you know, we have a governing body called OMVIC, and I hate to say it, but my experience with OMVIC on both the vendor and the dealer side has not always been the best. In the sense of, I always kind of expect that governing body to, you know, assist me. Like, I want help. You know, look, I don't think I went out there to put an ad out purposely to mislead somebody. But if maybe the language we used or the font size we used wasn't enough, you know, like, I would like to at least have like an open conversation about it. And
sure.
And I'm finding that the governing body here is not overly great about that. And I'm finding a lot of the other governing bodies that I talk to other dealers around the United States and, you know, in Canada are the same. So I actually feel that it is super important as dealers for us to take on the responsibility to truly understand, you know, our compliance. Because what I find sometimes is the disconnect is simply the disconnect is between operations and marketing. You know, like right now in a dealership, for a lot of cases, our operations marketing are like two different silos. And I swear the way that sometimes they communicate with each other is like Morse code, like beep, 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 beep.
Right.
That's the extent of the conversation.
The marketing department hears from the dealer principal and says, I want this ad on the internet before you go home.
Exactly.
And that's it. And they walk out of the office, and that's what they want. And so that marketing person doesn't have time or inclination or the resources or the knowledge or the understanding or any of that in trying to get that ad up on the internet that night.
And you know what it is? It's just like, it's not that we're doing it on purpose. It's just, it's not something that, look, we're here to sell cars. We're here to service cars. And it's just something that we not think of on a regular basis. But I find that, you know, look, if any dealership out there is watching a listing right now and you're utilizing an agency or someone internally, then at least once a quarter, you just need to be having a conversation around, you know, the creative message and the compliancy. And also, I mean, look, a lot of things have changed so much in our digital marketing efforts. You know, a lot of these, you know, especially with the new HEC compliancy with Google and Facebook, you know, there are things that we can't necessarily say, or if we do say, it requires more information or different, you know, targeting parameters. So like compliancy, or especially ad compliancy, is, well, it's always been a big deal, but it's going to be a monster deal here moving into 2021, if your agency is not on top of it, or if you're using someone internally and they're not on top of it, if you ask your agency what HEC is and they don't know, be concerned, because there's going to be a lot of wasted ad spend, happening. But like I said, I mean, this goes, you have the compliancy there with the intent to want to not have to resolve things, with, clients and, the dispute and any disputes there.
I think
when that
let me
does
just
happen,
interrupt for 1 second, Jason. I think what's important when you meet with a regulator, and I've met with all kinds of regulators, from the Secret Service to the IRS to the postal inspector. The Department of Housing and Urban Development has their own police department. I mean, it's incredible how many regulators there are. And I think the regulators, and I can speak from my experience, is that they want to, if they see you trying to comply, they're going to handle things one way.
Exactly.
If they see that you're flippant and you just don't care, they're certainly going to handle things a different way.
You know what, though? That's true in some cases, but I find like it's up to us. It's our ultimate responsibility, that we're the ones that are being proactive about it, right? Because we don't want to have to get to that situation, like the example you were using earlier, where now we're having to resolve a client's dispute. And you get to that place, boy, your options get pretty limited pretty damn quick, right?
Right.
So, and I know you have a lot of experience actually, that's where we're going to go. I know you have a lot of experience in resolving client dispute. So let's get into that. Let's try to not get to that point with our ad compliancy. But if we are in a situation where we are having to resolving the client dispute, what are some of the best practices?
Sure. So we were talking about some of them earlier, right? We talked about the first meeting, and the most important thing is to explain to the customer that you do want to help them, that you do want to make them happy. And there's a notion in the risk and insurance business that your first loss is your best loss. And I had somebody call me on the phone yesterday and say, well, what I saw that, on a video on your YouTube. What does that mean? Your first loss is your best loss. Well, that means that if you solve the problem right then and there, that it's going to be less expensive than letting it fester and letting them go to a lawyer or a regulator or the attorney general or whoever they want to go to, and then try to resolve it. So I'm going to encourage everyone who's listening to fix the problems as you know about them. Going back to the first meeting for a second.
Yeah, don't ignore them. Address them quickly.
Sure. I'm sorry?
I was saying, don't ignore them. We got to address them quickly. I mean, I find sometimes that situation will come in, and I'll admit, I'm like it too. Like I don't necessarily want to jump in front of a firing squad that quickly. So I have a tendency of maybe kind of pushing it back to it. But to your point, it's a time thing. Like, because, the longer it takes, the bigger the bigger the situation can be. But sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. So yeah, I mean, have somebody at the dealership, and if you don't want to have somebody at the dealership do it, outsource it to a company like ours. Mm-hmm. But at the first meeting, it's important to set the expectations. Let them know that you're going to listen to the story, that you're going to do your homework, you're going to talk to all of the people involved, that you're going to get to the bottom of it, and that at the second meeting, you're going to talk. You're going to have some follow-up questions. You're going to ask some more questions and try to start trial closing them on what the solution is. In the second meeting, you say things like, well, here's what I heard you say, and you go back through the story again. And we didn't talk about it a few minutes ago, but I've had first meetings last a whole day before. We were talking about how long it takes. I had a 6 or 7 or 8 hour meeting. I don't even remember with a client once.
Holy cow.
It was, we had to break. We brought lunch in. It was the whole thing. It started around 10, and I don't think I got home till 7 or 7:30 that night. So it takes as long as it takes. But at the second meeting, it's important to let the customer again know that you've talked to all the people involved, and that you do know what happened. As necessary, you apologize. You say, I'm sorry this happened. This is not how we like to be treated. We like to treat people with courtesy and fairness, right?
Right.
Or whatever your motto is. And we want to fix it. Now, I'm not sure I have the solution to fix it, but I want to let you know that I did go back and I did talk to everyone, and this is not how we want to conduct ourselves. And we want to get you happy. So you can do some trial closes and say, well, let me ask you a question. If we traded you out of the vehicle and got you into a newer one, or if we got you into an older one, if we got you into a bigger one, if we got you into a smaller one, whatever the case is, right? Each circumstance is different. Sometimes the what ifs can be, well, what if, how would you feel if I decided I was going to make a payment or two on your car to make up for it, because I don't want you to be unhappy with us?
Mm-hmm.
You can get some feedback. That's important in the second meeting. And then the third meeting, and obviously I'm doing this, in a very compressed way, but
of course,
in the third meeting, I think it's really super important to offer that customer at least two options. So you say, okay, Mr. Customer, I want to make you happy. Here's two ideas. And the reason two ideas is important is you don't want the customer to feel like you're shoving a solution down their throat.
Exactly.
So you offer two options, you say, and even if they have different monetary value to them, right? You might say, I'm going to offer you a service and parts credit of X dollars, or I'm going to make 3 payments for you of Y dollars, even if there's a large differential there. It's okay. Let them. I've had customers take the lower number before for whatever the reason.
For sure.
We just don't know necessarily what's happening in their lives that would tell us or give us a clue about which option they may or may not like. So it's okay to have different valued solutions. I think it's important, though, that you do give them options. And then as necessary, then you have to negotiate. You have to, if they say no, but I want X dollars, you have to talk it through with them, and it might require a fourth meeting.
I like this because it's a clean format, it's a clean process. And it's actually a process we're already used to kind of doing, right? Right. We listen, we document, all right, we show options, and then if necessary, we negotiate, all right? Like, this is something, but it's just, I think what it is that we have to identify when we have to do this, and and we do have to understand that this does take time. So that if you're not able to do it, then you need to be able to put someone in front of it. Look, I think when it comes to resolving client's dispute as a business, we understand the value behind resolving client dispute, because we know that it's a reputation thing, and anyone can go on the internet and say whatever the heck they want. I actually remember for a long time, this was years ago, there was a client that was so upset, opened up a website, and I think the URL was the dealership's name dot crooks or something. It was something weird, right?
Usually it sucks.
Sucks. Yeah. Oh, that's what it was. I actually think that's what it was. Dealership's name, then it said it sucks. That website organically ranked right side by side with that dealership for years.
Absolutely.
And, this is something that they could have gotten ahead of way in advance. So, but I think as an industry, we've gotten better at this. And this was years ago when this happened, but I think we've gotten better at this. But the area I don't think that there's still a lot of room for growth is in the area of resolving staff dispute. And I'm not going to say I'm great at this either, right? I mean, in this industry, we're very much so suck it up, buttercup, check it out the door, and shut the hell up and get back to work. Right. That is always kind of so. I'm curious, how do you identify? I'm thinking from a dealer principal's perspective, right? How do I know when my staff is just complaining, or if they're identifying something legitimate that does have to be resolved and gone through a process? What advice would you give a dealer principal that kind of asking you how to identify the differences there?
Sure, it's a good question. I think the first and most important thing is that every dealership should have an employee guidebook. Some people call them handbooks, but there's a differentiation between what a guidebook is and a handbook. I like the terminology of a guidebook better, because the handbook has connotations that everything is contained therein And if it's not written, then it's not true. And dealerships have so many policies and procedures that are written outside of that document. A guidebook guides you. A handbook seems more contained.
Yes.
So I think it's important to have a good guidebook. And I think in that guidebook, I think it's important that the dealer have a policy of an open door, that any employee can come complain. If they've complained through their chain of command and they're not getting satisfaction, that they can go right to the general manager or the dealer or whoever the designated person is.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's step number one in making sure you don't have employee problems.
You know what's funny as you're saying that? I remember one of the first dealerships I ever worked at as a young salesperson. The general manager there, which became a great mentor of mine actually, and really kind of pushed me, through my career, was ex-military. So he actually in his book had a process called running it up the flagpole. Now, I don't necessarily know the origins of that from a military perspective, but that's what he would say. He would I remember it's like he'd almost be in a meeting, someone would explain something, and he would just go, that needs to be run up the flagpole. And it was a defined process. If there was ever kind of and this was more of a staff dispute or a staff concern that need to be run through this process. And I'm sure you probably have a different word for it, but I feel like every dealership needs to have like a run up the flagpole process. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. I mean, all these things, the more policies and procedures you can put in place, I think the better off you are to a certain point. Of course, you don't want to go so far over that you can't be flexible with how you need to run the business. But I think there should be a designated person that employees can go to talk about whatever the complaints are. Certainly that person needs to be versed in or have access to someone who has complete knowledge of all of the various laws that pertain to that, and they're ever changing and ever moving. Every day it's hard to keep up with. Everything from the genetic, you can't discriminate against someone because of their genetics, to obviously some of the other obvious ones that we all know about.
It's so vast. There's so much there.
There's a lot of them, but I think the first and most important part is to have that person. And if they don't know, have them call somebody who does know. They have to have the authority to do that, though.
I really like the ability of having a hotline, and I definitely think you do need to have an individual, depending on the size of your organization, that can at least, consume any type of dispute or concern, and then decide, kind of what level of concern or how far up the flagpole it needs to go, kind of a process. And look, dealers, managers, if you're out there listening, to this and or watching this, and you're kind of, shaking your head back and forth, like, nah, man, like this is, I don't need it. Look, here's really what we're talking about. Here's the byproduct of what we're talking about. The byproduct is happy staff. Okay. And I will tell you, out of all the dealerships I've had the opportunity to visit, the ones that are most consistently profitable is a happy staff. And, putting these processes in place, yes, protect you from a liability perspective. Yes, supports your reputation management. Yes, it satisfies the compliancy that you may have. But really at the end of the day, it creates that culture of happiness. It may be boring, it may be tedious for you to put these processes together, but it's a proactive approach to keeping your staff and your culture happy. I know we're getting towards the tail end of our time today, Tom, and this has been a lot of fun. I'm sure we could probably jam for a lot longer, but before I let you go, I think there's still a lot of conversation that can be had here. And, for the dealers out there that are watching, listening, would like to kind of continue this conversation with you, right? What is the best way to connect with you?
Sure. Great. This is the shameless plug part, right?
Yes.
So my company name is Better Vantage Point. So BETTER, bettervantagepoint.com is my website. And you can get my contact information from there. And I'm also on LinkedIn under Tom Kline. So those are the quickest ways. to get through to me, and I'm certainly happy to answer any questions.
Awesome. Hey, Tom, thank you so much for taking the time to jam with me today. This has been a blast. You have yourself an amazing day.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks for letting me come on the show. I appreciate it.
It's been fun.
Thanks for tuning in to the Strategy Mob podcast with your host, Jason Harris. Don't want to miss new content? Be sure to sign up to be a mobster at strategymob.com to stay in the know. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe.